Greetings and welcome to the full review for Pinball, the man who saved the game. And so just be aware this review is completely spoilery, and so it's going to play out the entire movie in case you're interested. If you don't want to hear that but just want to hear my thoughts on the film without the spoilers, well, check this video that I'm linking to above. Well, let's get to it. As mentioned, it starts off with an actor portrayal of Roger sitting down to an interview to tell the director and audience about the legendary shot that changed history as well as an industry. If I was to nitpick on anything from the entire movie, I do wish that Roger himself was sitting there, but that's not a criticism of the actor Dennis Boutsikaris in any way. He's fantastic, and from the few times I've met with the real Roger Sharp at trade shows, Dennis captures Roger's way of talking as well as his mannerism. I suppose it's just that since Roger's alive and executive produced this film, it would have made it just that much better, but again, it's fine. That all said, old Roger takes us down memory lane, where he will often stand to the side of his younger self, introducing us to the situation, then letting his younger self, portrayed by Mike Feist, take it from there. I really like how they blend this throughout the film. It works perfectly, and it's often subtle, not being overused. In fact, you don't see older Roger for a while at some points. The first trip back is to 1971, when Roger discovered pinball at a bar when he was studying at the University of Wisconsin. Turns out he was terrible at the game until one day he met a beer-drinking, pinball-playing guy who asks him to take over as he has to go, but he can't let the ball drain. He gives Roger a brief lesson on how to play, which is about finding a target and controlling the ball instead of randomly mashing it, or seal flippering, or pinball flippering as we sometimes call it. They don't use that in the movie. And from there, Roger's game improves dramatically. Soon he's drawing crowds and the attention of a young lady, where they get married and move to New York after his graduation. Unfortunately, this marriage is rather short-lived. They don't get into any of the reasons why or many other details. It just jumps to 1976, where Roger is signing the divorce papers and his now ex-wife throws in an insult.
You should be happy. You finally wrote something important.
This also sets us up for Roger's desires for a career. He had been in advertising and writing copy for that, but his real goal was to write something important that would change people. The down on his luck then continues in an avalanche as he has all of his furniture taken away since it was given to him by his ex-wife's furniture store owning parents. He's laid off from his job and now needs to find new work, but getting hired on as a writer when his thin portfolio is compromised of safe stuff is much easier said than done. They only dwell on this long enough to make the point, although it's within this downtime that Roger's one day walking down the street when he comes across an adult bookstore, and he's not paying any attention to that, but he hears something very familiar to him that causes him to look, and that's the dings of the bell on a pinball machine. That allure helps him overcome his hesitation quick enough, and he discovers 3 pinball machines in the bookstore lobby, with there being a funny moment when he first touches the game and has to wipe his hand off from something on there. Still, he had not seen pinball for years, and so quickly this place becomes his go-to. He even strikes up a little friendship with the shopkeeper. It's after this that he finally gets called in for an interview at Gentleman's Quarterly, better known as GQ magazine. He hops into the elevator to head to their offices when a young woman by the name of Ellen joins him, and they quickly hit it off, although Roger handles all of his initial encounters with her in a perfectly awkward way. The two actors definitely have chemistry. They're acting spot on, and it's this relationship that's really the foundation of the film. Yes, it is about pinball, so if you're just here for that, you'll get that. But for a reason you'll understand at the very end, and I'll not fully spoil it, is that this relationship is this that blooms between the two that's most important to Roger. Now, Roger gets the job as GQ was looking for a safe writer, and riding on that high, he calls up Ellen for their first date, or pre-date rather. Ellen knows exactly what she's looking for, being divorced with an 11-year-old son. She's not looking for fun, but for a husband to start a family with. Roger's somewhat coy on his intentions, though. He doesn't dwell much on his recent divorce. You can tell that there's still pain there, and that causes him to be hesitant. Still, they're attracted to each other, and despite hitting the other with some things that could always be interpreted as a potential red flag for someone you just met, they set up something that runs through the film, and I would guess their marriage. It's, well, I'm still here. Roger's first assignment at GQ is to write a 1,500-word article on bicycles. Not a subject he knows a ton about, but this also sets up how pinball helps him focus. While he spends his time researching at the library, he frequently goes to the bookstore with his notepad to jot down thoughts, and you can see how pinball kind of helps him in his process. This is soon verbalized when Roger and Ellen have their first real date together and they're sharing banter on the most embarrassing thing about them, when Roger uses that as an opportunity to show Ellen pinball. And there's some comedy here in her "you're really taking me to an adult bookstore" reaction, but even more so when Roger begins teaching her how to play. The film Hollywoods it up, but it's quickly broken by old Roger interjecting with, "Wait, you're really going to do the whole 'I wrap my arms around her to help her play romance' thing? Come on, that's not exactly what happened." I like that as it brings the film down to earth, and it happens again near the end. And since they didn't overdo it, it's effective and it's great comedy. Eventually we get to the point where the bookstore is busted for having pinball machines, where Roger drops by when the cops are pulling the games out. And he now learning that pinball is illegal in New York and many other places. While he's upset about that, he has his first encounter with Ellen's son, which starts things off a little awkwardly for them since he's rambling about pinball and legality and she just wants to have him meet her son. Again, the acting here is played off really well, and it takes Roger some time to warm up to both Ellen and her son, as well as for them to warm up to him. Now, this event does start Roger down the path towards City Hall, with him looking into it and writing a positive article about pinball for GQ. You soon meets up with an organization known as the MAA. They're trying to overturn the ban on pins, but Roger isn't really interested in the politics of it. He just wants to find out how he can get a pinball machine in his house so he can play it. After he does, there's some extra bonding that happens with Ellen and Seth, Roger eventually taking Seth to a father-son bowling night after Seth's biological dad doesn't show up, which also sets something up for later. Within this time, Roger gets the idea for a book about pinball, of course. He gets a publisher and a pay advance where he and a GQ photographer fly to Chicago to interview the guys who made the games. Roger has to be a bit tenacious here with the first guy who doesn't want to talk with him, but in showing that one of his games saw better sales thanks to his article, much less a book, the boss relents and Roger gets the interview. It's during these seasons that we also get a little more explanation as to what pinball is and how to play, lots of history, which is all a very nice touch. Roger also eventually flies to California to meet with Harry Williams, the man whose namesake was Williams Pinball and the guy who invented things like the tilt sensor. There's a hilarious story about what Harry did before he created the tilt sensor to discourage rough players from picking up the machines that had me laughing out loud, although I probably did more so because I'm an operator and not just a player. The book becomes a crucial development for Roger and Ellen, as Roger was terrible with the typewriter, so Ellen, who's a secretary in her day job, takes that side of it over. It eventually creates some tension in their relationship, setting up the low you generally have in romantic subplots. Of course, you also might be wondering about the City Hall shot. Well, the MAA, which these days would be known as the AMOA, loved Roger's article, knew about his book, and also knew that he was a skilled star player, but every time they bring up going to City Hall to overturn the ban, Roger rejects it. And he did this a few times, mainly because he had his own pinball machine at home and didn't want to get more involved than that, at least until things happen with his book that he can't control, such as many of the interviews getting cut. That turns him around so that he wants to redeem the game. At first, the MAA just wants him to testify about how fun pinball is, and then they would hit the council with what they thought was a strong closer, that pinball isn't porn, and yet porn businesses were legal in the city. But Roger is offended at that and has a much better idea, because again, he wants to redeem the game, not say it's just better than porn. His idea is that he'll play the game for the city council. The date's set, things are prepped when Ellen and Roger have a fight due to that aforementioned issue with the interviews getting cut from his book, and Roger walks out on them. So some payoff to some earlier setup on something that happened with her ex. Roger goes to the meeting in this emotional state, which of course is also one reason why the film spent so much time on the two. Yes, pinball is a passion of his, but so are Ellen and Seth. He knows he screwed up, and now he has to make the case and get pinball unbanned because they only get one shot at this. This whole scene is great as he stumbles a few times out of the gate calling the councilman judge. He doesn't handle some of the initial questions very well. He starts reading off of his notes in a dry manner, which further provokes the chair councilman. And then there's tension over the game where it comes time where Roger's like, okay, let me show you. But the councilman says that the machine could be rigged, so he wants Roger to show them on a game that it's a game of skill, as he claims, on a backup machine that was sitting to the side. Now this gives them a 5-minute break where Roger goes and calls up Ellen to apologize, but she doesn't say anything for most of the time except for "I'm still here" at the end, another payoff to what was set up a few times earlier. Getting that all off his chest, it's time to go take the shot. And then continuing on, the scene is done really well. Roger calls his shots, explains how it's about control, how skilled players sometimes intentionally let the ball drain, and the climax hits when he has to make a true skill shot using the plunger to hit a single blinking target at the top. When it hits, it's the second Hollywood moment with everyone cheering and hugging, high-fiving, all that. And then old Roger interjects again to say, "It didn't happen like that. I took the shot, then the council went and voted unanimously to lift the van." But again, the story isn't 100% done here, and it has another moment I enjoyed, where the director, throughout this almost hour and a half, he's been asking Roger, what does this story have to do with pinball, or what does this have to do with the shot? But now, after all we've learned about Ellen and Roger, he didn't wrap that story up. Last we heard, it was just that phone call, and so the director, just like the audience, wants to know what happened between you two. It's perfectly done because it's expressing what we want to know and resolves the phone call. And this brings us to a very satisfying ending where you get to see many family portraits of the Sharp family during the credits. Again, there is a moment at the end where they use actor portrayals of the two sons he had with Ellen, Zach and Josh, where I'm curious why they didn't use the real sons, but again, that's a minor nitpick. Again, this is the best movie I've ever seen about pinball and, by an extension, arcades and our industry. Roger Sharp and his sons are true arcade heroes, and seeing the legend put to screen is entertaining, educational, and satisfying. It's too bad that it's not getting a ton of attention from what I can tell. I went to Amazon to look it up. It's not in the recent editions, recent releases, so I had to search for it manually. Hopefully, word spreads and that changes. Well, that's all for now. If you've seen it already, what did you think? We'll see you next time.